Welcome to Module 2, Where Can It Be Found? Where we're going to look at the types and the uses of asbestos. The first type we're going to look at is chrysotile, also known as white asbestos, which is regularly known as the most commonly used form of asbestos and can be found in roofs, ceilings, walls and floors, downpipes, gutters, soffits and fascia boards, textured coatings such as Artex, and also water storage tanks and boiler flues. The second type we look at is amosite, otherwise known as brown. You can see the slight brown colouring. Amosite was frequently used in pipe insulation, insulating boards, ceiling tiles and thermal insulation products. So we're only two types in and we can see the mass use of asbestos throughout the building industry. And the third type we're going to look at is blue asbestos, crucidulite, which was used frequently to provide fire protection, to insulate pipes. It was also used in asbestos insulating board up to about 1965. It was used in asbestos cement up to 1969, and also millboard and asbestolux up to 1965. So millboard is another sort of asbestos insulating board, and asbestolux was a trade name for one type of AIB, asbestos insulating board. So that's the three types. So now we can look at some examples of asbestos containing materials. First is perforated AIB ceiling tiles. Second is floor tiles. Pipe lagging. And as noted by the yellow text there, the most important thing to know is actually where the asbestos is. Of course, as we're explaining now, there are different types of asbestos. It's got different, obviously it's used in different locations. The most important thing to actually know is actually where it is. Once you know where it is, then you can sort of implement your further control measures, which is not disturbing immediately. Further examples of loose fill insulation here. So loose fill insulation was used in cavity walls, under floorboards, in loft spaces. And when you look at the fluffiness, the texture of loose fill insulation, you can imagine that lifting up a board and it getting blown up into the air, releasing lots of fibres. Looking back to Module 1, when we talked about asbestos being respirable, you can imagine those fibres being released into the air and being breathed deeply down into your lungs, especially if you're removing boards from above your head. As stated in the yellow text there, due to the sort of high fibre release, loose fill asbestos insulation is probably the most dangerous asbestos containing material. One to really look out for. It was also found quite rarely, but also if the vermiculite insulation predates 1990, then it was on rare occasions that could also contain asbestos. So vermiculite itself, a mineral, would, when that heats up, it expands to around 30 times its size. It's smokeless, odourless, and actually it's got a fire preventing. It's fire preventing itself. So it was used, but as I just said there, it's quite rare to find that. Further examples, bath panels used quite extensively. Again, remembering if the property predates the year 2000, there's a high possibility that there will be asbestos containing materials. You can see there a bitumen sink pad, and also in textured coatings such as Artex's. Again, this is fireproofing, it's insulating properties. Further examples, asbestos in a fire door. Understandably, back then in fire doors, obviously with its fire resistant properties. Lining to cupboard doors. And on that last picture there, you can see a board which has been added, an asbestos board has been added for fire protection. Further examples would be asbestos in putty around window frames. So if you think again of the fire resistant properties of asbestos, in putty you obviously want the windows to stay intact. So it was quite a good use back in the day to put asbestos into putty. And some of the putty itself would expand. So again, increasing the fire resistance and preventing the windows from popping and smoke getting through. Internal windowsills. And asbestos insulating panels below the window board. Again, stopping that cavity, so fire going through the cavity. Quite beneficial to have that asbestos insulating board, obviously not knowing the secondary and very important hazards that it causes. On to examples of asbestos cements used in corrugated roof sheets, flue pipes, and in water storage tanks. As you can imagine, they're looking at those corrugated roof sheets compared to the pipe lagging or to the loose fill insulation. They're obviously quite solid and they're not as friable, so we tend to look for the friability. If something is highly friable, then it has the potential to be pushed out into the air to be respirable. But if it's non-friable, like asbestos corrugated roof sheets there's a lot less chance of the roof sheets dispersing asbestos fibres into the air. And just an interesting fact there, that when the Twin Towers, when the World Trade Center in September 2001, if you remember, when the Twin Towers were collapsed due to the terrorism incident, more than 1,000 tons of asbestos are thought to have been released into the air. And that concludes sort of this slideshow part of Module 2. So just a recap, confirmation of knowledge. So loose fill asbestos insulation is probably the most dangerous asbestos containing material. Again, that's due to what we mentioned, the friability and its ability to disperse into the air and then be easily breathed into the lungs. Highlighted in yellow, just in case that comes up in one of the assessment questions. So removing any fragile ACM is high risk. Like we just said there about the friability, if it is fragile, then it has the potential to release fibres. We looked at chrysotile, white, amosite, brown, and crucidulite, blue. And I also mentioned that one of the most important things to know is where exactly the asbestos is in the building. It's one thing to know the colour of it. Are you really going to take note of the colour of it? But what we really need to know at this level is where it is. So thank you very much. You're now going to have a look at some literature from the HSC about where asbestos hides in the property, in residential and also in industrial. Thank you.